Hi, I'm Conrad Marshall, and from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, welcome to Good Weekend Talks, a magazine for your ears featuring in-depth conversations with fascinating people from sport and politics, science and culture, business and beyond. Every week you can download new episodes in which top journalists from across our newsrooms talk to compelling people about the definitive stories of the day. In this episode, we speak to Helen Goh. The celebrated cookbook author left Melbourne in 2006 at the age of 40 for London, where as luck would have it, she fell in with Yotam Ottolenghi early in his ascent to global cooking superstardom. Goh became one of Ottolenghi's key cooking and testing collaborators and went on to write 2 cookbooks with him. He's now actually godparent to the eldest of her 2 sons. But what many don't know is that Goh, who moved to Melbourne from Malaysia when she was 11, is also a trained psychologist with a PhD under her apron, and that she still sees patients in London alongside her baking career. Goh has just released her first solo book, Baking and the Meaning of Life, in which she combines her 2 great loves, psychology and cooking. And joining us today, she discusses how each discipline feeds into the other, the perfectionism required for writing a good recipe, and what she's learned from 8 years of writing recipes for the food pages of Good Weekend magazine. She discusses all this and more with Katrina Strickland, the magazine's former editor, now a senior writer, who brought Goh into the magazine and, as it happens, went to school with her too.
Thanks, Conrad, and welcome, Helen.
Hi, Katrina. Thanks so much for having me.
I think you're the first of our columnists who we've had on Good Weekend Talks.
Oh, really? Oh, I feel honoured.
Yeah. So tell us, we know that you grew up in Malaysia and moved to Melbourne when you were 11, and then you moved to London at 40. So that's 3 different countries, 3 different cuisines.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know what an ingredient in each of those countries and then what it reminds you of with that country. So let's start with Malaysia. When you look back on, 0 to 11, what food and smells and experiences spring straight to mind?
Yes, that's a tricky one because Malaysia is just the ingredients are so complex and there's so many. But I would have to say pandan. I'm going to go with pandan.
And what's your memory of pandan as a child?
Well, first of all, we had pandan growing in our garden quite prolifically, and also the scent and also the colour is so sort of distinct. And, it's like they call it the vanilla of the East. So any cakes, well, they're usually steamed or fried or boiled. Any of the cakes would have that very distinct green colour, and you just know automatically it's pandan.
How do you remember life in Malaysia? What is your feeling about it? Was it a happy time? Was it a stressful time? You talk about in the book about the family leaving because there were discriminatory policies against Chinese Malaysians.
Yes.
How did that impact your life there?
Well, I think the new economic policy, I think it was called, which came into effect, I want to say early 70s, I think, but I could be wrong, could be late 60s. And I think it made my father very jumpy and very nervous that, they weren't sure what it was, except that it was very possible that there may be limits to education for Chinese Malaysians. And that was his main thing, that we were educated. So that made us move, that he started the proceedings to migrate to Australia. And I remember life before that being, I guess it felt like we were a big fish in a very small pond. We weren't in Kuala Lumpur. We were in Klang, which was sort of, I think it's south and quite a small kind of precinct. And Dad was involved in shipping and politics, and so it felt like he like we were very privileged in some ways. And although I think at that time it's not unusual to have chauffeurs and gardeners and, home tutors, we had all of that. So it felt very privileged. And then I think moving to Australia was kind of a real eye-opener because, we were literally nobody.
Yes. And what food then comes to mind when you think of Melbourne? That must have been such a boring cuisine in a sense after the smells and exoticness of Malaysian
I think
food.
it was so new. Everything was new. Schools, language, everything. But the one thing that wasn't new was that my mother continued to cook, Malaysian food. So that was our constant, and that was very important for her in terms of it was something that she felt she was competent at, in a country where she could not speak the language. And then it was sort of the comfort that we all came home from wherever we were challenging, spaces during the day, and come home to that meal together that was, I think now I look back, even more important than I realize, not just for her, but for all of us, just that touchstone to sort of, back then. But actually, when I think of Melbourne now, I think of the years in my 30s when I was, single and an adult and forging my way. And I think of cosmopolitans.
Yeah.
It's sort of my free single days. Yeah.
And it's funny, isn't it? Because Melbourne is really thought of as the food capital of Australia.
Yes.
And the coffee culture, the bars, the
yes.
great, restaurants. But yes, I can imagine back then in the 70s, it might not have been at all like that.
Well, in the 70s, we were still very much at school and at home. So that was sort of the...
Yeah, you weren't doing cafes.
I wasn't doing cosmopolitans then. The food that I think about most when I think about my time in Melbourne as an adult is Vietnamese, like pho. And I remember Victoria Street.
Yeah.
I remember after I started my practice as a psychologist in Grattan Street, Drummond Street in Carlton, and I lived in Toorak, and I would drive in. But I would go for a swim in the morning and then have a pho in Victoria Street and then go to work. And that just seemed like I must have done that 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So that was, I think of that with Melbourne.
And I think you've said that whilst your mum was a very good cook, she wasn't a baker.
No, because Malaysian cakes are, well, I think now if you go to Malaysia now, I'm sure that there are loads of all kinds of bakeries. But at that time, growing up, the cakes were squidgy little steamed cakes, using glutinous flour and cassava flour and tapioca. So very, very different. So when we moved to Australia, this strange thing called the oven in the kitchen was very foreign. You
didn't have an oven in Malaysia?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't recall. No, I would say not.
No. And so then you went to university. You, with your boyfriend at the time, decided to open a cafe in Hawthorn, in Auburn Road, Hawthorn in Melbourne, and you made the cakes.
Yes.
How did you get into baking then? What made you decide that baking was your thing?
I shudder at our naivety then. And I mean, knowing now what I know, how we had that chutzpah to do that.
But isn't that great? Because what age were you at that time?
I was in my mid to late 20s, and he was probably about the same. And it was just lunacy and naivety because
he was a journalist.
You
were a psychology student at the time?
I had just finished undergraduate psychology, and I was taking a break before going into to do postgraduate psychology. The faculty had said to me that I was too young and that it would be beneficial for me to get some life experience, probably very sound advice, which I took. And I was actually a pharmaceutical rep at that time. And, it didn't really, it was great in some ways. You were given a car and a lot of flexibility. But somehow, it was the food that felt like my calling.
Yeah. And you made cakes for the people that you would visit, or they made cakes for you? I can't remember which it was.
I mean, I never made anything, actually. I mean, literally, I had no experience. When I was a rep, part of the drill was to talk to doctors about new drugs. And what I found very quickly is that if I arranged a lunch, I would have a captive audience, that they would all turn up. I believe this practice is no longer legit.
Yeah.
But at that time, it was one of the ways you could be more efficient as well as, to add a bit of levity to the day. And over time, I felt I was actually much, much more interested in what was for lunch and, the menu for lunch and choosing what was for lunch than actually, talking to the doctors about the drugs.
Yeah. And then the cafe, you had a critic from The Age, in fact, came in, just wandered in because he was walking by, had your chocolate cake and described it I think I've still got the cutting actually, in a review that said, world's best chocolate cake.
Yes,
tell me what that did to the business and also to your confidence as a baker, given that, as you say, you hadn't been trained and nor had you really had a history in your family of baking.
Yes. When he came in he came in, he ate the cake and he did say we were given the heads up that he would write something, but I didn't expect that it was going to be on the front page of the Sunday Age it was at that time, with my picture in it and the cake and the title, World's Best Chocolate Cake. Controversial. What did it do? I think I didn't sleep properly for the next 2 years, for the remaining time that we had the business, because that really put us on the map. I mean, the cafe was, despite our lack of experience, it was ticking along quite nicely. And it's not modesty saying this, but I think if I had any talent, it was to employ the right people. And I had a group of really lovely, a small group of people who were very, very good cooks. And I actually learned from them. And the chocolate cake, yes, I mean, it did put us on the map. I lived above the store at the time. And after the article, we would be making that cake all around the clock, basically. And I would, as the last thing I did before the cafe closed, I would put a batch in the oven, set a timer for 90 minutes, go and grab something to eat, come back, put another batch in the oven, and up until, going to bed, actually.
Yeah.
So it's got 2 eggs.
2 eggs.
And it does have flour, but it's all made in one bowl with one whisk. And I think that was its chief, not just the recipe, but actually it's a really reliable cake. In fact, Jeff Slattery at the time wrote that when he made it, when I gave him the recipe, he left out the eggs and it was still really nice.
Oh, right.
So it's quite a forgiving cake.
And it's in sweet, your book.
It is in sweet, and I was very certain that I didn't want it named the world's best chocolate cake, because I think you could, disappointment is guaranteed when you call something that.
Yeah.
And in sweet, it's called take home chocolate cake.
Very modest.
Well, that's tied to the experience when we had the cafe, that people would come in for lunch, and then we made the cakes in lots of different sizes, and they would then take away one of those cakes. So yes, take away chocolate cake.
And then you did it in reverse, didn't you? Because then when you closed it from really exhaustion, you just run out of steam for running that cafe. You wanted to then go and get, I guess, proper training, and you ended up eventually at Donovan's, where you were cooking for 250 people. Again, you were kind of in the pastry chef area.
Yes.
Tell us the key things that you learned from scaling up to that kind of big, that Donovan's, just in case people aren't from Melbourne or don't know, it is a big kind of seaside restaurant.
Kind of destination restaurant.
Yeah.
I mean, it was at the time, yes. Yeah.
Tell us what you learned from that kind of scaling up process.
That's a good question. I think to do things in stages. I think at the cafe, because of my lack of experience and training, it was always felt like I was just, running on adrenaline. And although that's definitely the case still with a restaurant of that size at the time with Donovan's, the thing that I learned was this idea of mise en place. Do you know what that means? I mean, it's a French word for everything in its place. And that was key. That was absolutely key to that transition. So you would have, let's say you would have a plated dessert. It may have separate 5 different components. So one part might be ice cream. So you would have on your prep list ice cream and all the things that you would do, to prepare that ice cream. Make the custard, churn it, freeze it. And then you would have, let's say, the sponge, and a kind of timetable of what could be prepared ahead of time for assembly. And this idea of assembly, you have 5 different components already prepared through the day, and then you would get this docket, at dinner service, and you would have to then plated up. That's the essential difference, because at the cafe you make a cake and you either take home that chocolate cake or you take a slice.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And you, in terms of cooking, so you really kind of perfected things there, and then you went to London to be with David, who's your husband now, and you got a job with Yotam Ottolenghi. But I guess you also had a doctorate in psychology at that point. I guess that's fairly unusual, because a lot of cooks who particularly ones who kind of we interview and know well, have come up and haven't done that kind of, like, I guess, university mind work kind of career. And yet you chose to do something that's very handwork. What was that always a tussle for you, that you wanted to do something creative with your hands, but you also loved the intellectual? What made you choose, I guess, the physicality of cooking over the more head work of psychology?
I never could. I think there was a point when I thought about cooking, just the physicality of it, that couldn't be sustained, and that at some point I might just have to leave. And probably when I went back to do my postgraduate, in fact, I did the postgraduate while I was working at Donovan's, and that got me the registration to work as a psychologist. And when I moved to London, what I realized was that my Australian registration didn't allow me to practice as a psychologist in London. And at that point, I think I really thought that, now it's time to settle down, open a practice and really ensconce myself into the role of a psychologist. But there was the red tape to convert the registration from Australian to British was so opaque and so there was so much. It was an 80-page manual that I just thought I could not do it, but I really wanted to practice. And the only other alternative was to do a doctorate. So it was actually at that point that I enrolled in the doctorate.
In London?
In London.
Yes.
But there was 3 to 4 months between when I applied and between the doctorate starting. And I think David, my husband, was quite worried that I was going to be, because I didn't know anybody at all, not one single person. So
he'd already been there for a while.
He'd been there for 15 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
He's Australian as well. So he said all this, knowing that I do have this, obviously, kitchen work, that I could do that. He suggested I might visit this cute little store in Notting Hill down the road from where we lived. So I went to visit that place, and it was an Ottolenghi deli, and I thought, I could work here. It just seemed different to anything else I'd worked anywhere else I'd worked at. So I wrote a letter, an email, and Yotam got to me an hour later, and then we were hours after that, we were sitting talking. And then that was a Friday afternoon, I remember. And he said, you can start on Monday.
And he had just the one store at that time?
At that time, no, there was one in Islington and there was one in Kensington. So 3.
So he was quite well known, but not on the kind of global stratosphere that he's on now.
No, he was. The cafes and delis were well known for the kind of food and the aesthetic of it. It was a very, it was white and clean and clear, but then this sort of explosion of color for the salads and the windows with huge meringues. So it had a very distinct vibe, and people did come to sort of admire and to eat there. But he wasn't well known. I don't think he had his column in The Guardian at that time. And
you started off chopping and then very quickly changed. Tell us that story.
Yes, I think, I came away feeling that was the end of my pastry. I was going to, settle down into psychology. But when I saw that window of salads, I thought that was so different to anything I'd seen, in Melbourne at the time. I mean, of course, now I'm in Australia and I think, it's just so, the food is just amazing. It's just punches above its weight in, it's just amazing. Anyway.
In Australia.
Yeah. But at that time, these salads, these huge platters of salad, it was really like an Aladdin's cave. And so I said, could I be in the salad section? And I worked at that time with Sami Tamimi, who was the head chef at the restaurants then. And yes, so my job And I mean, although the delis were small, loads and loads of people would come and queue. There would be queues. So we had to make huge platters, and it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be chopping, 2 boxes of butternut squash a day. And I remember, walking home with blisters, feeling like my hands were so sore, and really feeling sorry for myself that, there I was, a registered psychologist and everything, and here I was walking home with, blistered hands, blistered fingers.
Yeah. And then, so you've really grown literally with his success, and all of you have kind of got your own success through that. It's a lovely kind of flowering, isn't it?
Yes.
Your role, how has your role changed? Because you essentially develop recipes. Is that right?
That's right. So when it was time for me to start the doctorate, I said to Yotam, I'm leaving now. Thank you for everything. And he said, well, you're not studying all the time. Surely you can, still stay with us. So there has never been sort of roles that I've stepped into. There've always been roles that have been created because of the circumstances, whether it was me going to do a doctorate or taking time out to have my children. And I think it was down to Yotam's openness, to that fluidity to expand with me in a way. Both of us, I guess, being willing to take a leap into the unknown. There's never been a role of recipe developer at that time. He just said, well, if you're not working on the weekends, we have this little warehouse in Camden. You could come and just, play around and make a few cakes. And so it sort of developed very organically.
Listeners might not realise that you still do see some patients as a psychologist every week.
Yes.
How does that influence your baking, and how does your baking influence your psychology?
I think for a long time I really saw that there were 2 parallel tracks that never met, that they were very, very separate. And I did have this fear that my patients would know that I was really a baker, I moonlighted as a baker. Just because I felt that maybe they would think I wasn't so serious about my work with them. How does it inform? For a long time I would say it didn't. It was almost like what you were asking before. There was a part of me that was very tuned into the more cerebral aspects of psychology, but then I felt that I needed the more physical, creative aspects of cooking. But now, if I have to think about it, I think the confluence would be the sense of a process happening and patience and presence. This idea that you really have to be tuned in to your patient, and you really have to be tuned into what you're baking. I mean, yes, you could whip up a sponge and not be overly focused, but part of the pleasure, I think, of baking is that focus, that it takes you away from that white noise in your head, and that you could, with your hands and your senses, bring yourself to that. And I think for me, that's sort of the enjoyable part of it. So I would think those 3 Ps, probably, yeah.
And is it something that you overtly advise patients who need to get out of their head and perhaps do some stress relief? Do you tell them to bake or to cook?
No, never. Yeah. The college that I chose to do the doctorate in, I had been trained in Australia in psychodynamic psychotherapy. And when I was going to do the doctorate to satisfy the requirement for registration, I wasn't so much interested in what kind of psychology it was. In my head, I was psychodynamic all the way, but I chose it for convenience, the college for convenience. And I also loved Regent's Park with all the topiary. So I really chose the institution for the train line and the topiary, I would have to say. So that took me. That college was helmed by an existential, very well-known existential practitioner called Ernesto Spinelli. Although it took me many, many years of the doctorate to see the relevance of existential psychology. So in the sense, when I'm with my patients, I'm not advising anything. I'm just I guess I'm listening intently and maybe echoing back to them what they feel that they're saying, what I'm hearing, what they're saying about their lives. And in it, I might be tuning in a psychodynamic level to their history or some of their unconscious processes, but I'd also very much be tuned in because of my existential studies, tuned into how they make a meaningful life, how they live, what do they do that makes their lives meaningful. So I wouldn't be offering advice, rather than I would say listening intently and echoing back.
And that brings us to your book, Baking and the Meaning of Life,
Right.
in which you talk about existentialism and that thread of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
What's really fascinating about the book and what makes it really magical, I think, is that you do combine your psychology and your understanding of what baking does for community and for relationships with 100 recipes.
Yes.
What made you decide to bring, as you said, they were parallel train tracks, what made you decide to bring them together, and what were you trying to achieve in doing that?
I think over the years of doing the column, I'd had, feedback.
The column for Good Weekend.
The column for Good Weekend.
Yes.
I've always thought that it would be really lovely to compile the recipes together. Sometimes if I've been worried about a recipe not hitting the spot, my husband would, ground me by saying, look, don't worry, it's fish and chip paper the next day. If I feel a recipe hasn't quite, made it. But I did think how nice it would be to compile. So in my head, and actually in reality, I'd had a number of publishers contact me since publishing Sweet to do a cookbook. And I never really felt that there was a real urge. I didn't feel the urge to do that until if the penny dropped in one particular week. It was in 2023. There was a spate of natural disasters that year, quite unnerving. The deadliest one was an earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria, and we were all watching on, very helpless and grief-stricken for them. And there was a British food writer who decided that she wanted to galvanize the baking community and to put together a bake sale to raise money for the British Red Cross, who were at that time, looking after the victims. And we had 2 days to prepare for it, and it was all done through a kind of Bush Telegraph Instagram style, and we were to deliver everything to this pub in North London very early on the Saturday morning. So I'd made, cupcakes and cornbread and muffins, and I was delivering these goods very early on the Saturday morning with my kids in the back and my husband driving, and we were balancing these boxes of cakes in, and we dropped them off to this pub in North London. And when we got back into the car, my husband said to me, he's a bit of a numbers man, I guess, and he said, that's just such an inefficient way to raise money. Wouldn't it have been better if everybody dropped £20? And I thought, he's right. I mean, it was very inefficient. But what he wasn't tuned into and what he wasn't privy to, because he was waiting in the car, was this sense of pride that we all had, this sense of competence, the sense of autonomy that we had, that we were doing something beyond our needs in solidarity to these people thousands of miles away. And the community was of sort of the community of bakers, the community of North Londoners who felt very proud that this was happening in their local pub, and the sense of belonging to a bigger cause, to have a bigger cause. And all the way home from, North London to West London where we lived, I was sort of championing this idea that it's not just cake, that it was something more that we were offering, and that, chiefly nobody needs to eat cake, but it's also that joy of something that wasn't for sustenance. It was just for the pure joy of it. And that wasn't trivial.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. The other thing that really does come through in the book is that, we're in a kind of time of loneliness epidemic. We're all glued to our smartphones. We're all kind of talking about AI and all these kind of things that are going to make us even more separate from each other. in a sense, what you're saying is that things like baking, it's the way in which we drop in to see someone, drop a cake in when they're ill or when they're upset because they've had a breakup or when they're celebrating because something's happened.
Yes.
Do we kind of need it more than ever at this point in history, do you think?
I agree. I think it's become so atomized, through, our smartphones and devices. And I think that baking is uniquely a vehicle to convey those things that in one bake you can say, I've spent 2 hours making this and it's for you.
So you say all these things non-verbally.
Exactly.
Really.
I think that you do say it just, there was a time when a friend of mine whose husband was unwell and was going through chemotherapy, and he had his treatments, organized, and over many months I'd drop off, lasagna, soup and salads, and they were very appreciative. But I think there was one point when he was craving an apple pie, and I dropped that over. And, it was because it was completely unnecessary, but it also, in just looking at the pie, he would have known that I'd spent quite a bit of time in a focused attention to make him that pie. It was what it represented. So not just the comfort of eating the pie, but what the act actually represented.
Yeah, so true. You give a lot of great tips in your books, and I think in your columns for Good Weekend as well. I think some recipe writers aren't as specific as you. Is that just a part of your nature, or is that come from trial and error, from learning? I mean, there's nothing like a weekly column to teach you what to do right and wrong.
Yes.
Tell us why because I think they're very useful, those little tips you give.
Many people say that they cook but they don't bake, and I think it's this. I think when they say that, they're tuning into this feeling of baking as being inflexible, being rule governed and inflexible. And actually, it's true. I think there are some rules that do make you a more confident baker, but it's being able to say, well, if you can't find this, use that. I think it can reassure you that there's not just this one way and it's going to fail if you don't have just this ingredient, and just to kind of loosen things up a bit.
Yeah.
But also I think the frustration when you go to the trouble to shop for your ingredients and then to make it, and to feel like one little part that you're unsure of stumps you, and then it either gives you the jitters and you lose the confidence to bake it to its sort of full capacity, and just sometimes that voice just to say, don't worry if it looks curdled, just keep on, it will be fine. Sometimes that's all you need to keep going.
So true.
Right.
I've been at that position myself. One of the other things really looking through the book that struck me was all the colour and all the ingredients that I guess are very multicultural. You've got a lot of matcha, you've got persimmon, tamarind. Is that a very deliberate way of talking to the world as it is now, or is that just that they add good colour or taste? Or is that your experience? What's that?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't start out with that idea of, what magical or what esoteric ingredient I can use, because I think it's got to work. I think it's lovely to add an interest and to excite, with something a bit unusual, but not gratuitously. I think that, when it is gratuitous, it's really about how clever the writer is rather than how useful the bake is. And I think there must have been a time, I don't know how many years ago, when I really prided myself on being a clever baker. And I've changed, I've kind of, I feel like I've developed into someone who is more focused on delivering that joy of a recipe that works, rather than, look how clever this recipe is.
Yeah. You also have a lot of options for vegans or dairy-free. is that really a non-negotiable in 2025 that you need to give those options?
Yes, I think it is. And I'll be the first to say it's not my forte. So I like it when a bake is naturally vegan or naturally gluten-free rather than, how can I veganize or make this gluten-free? Because I think also there are loads of people who are dedicated to that, and I leave it to them. But if it does happen that, something is gluten-free or vegan, I think, great, I will completely embrace that.
Yeah. And what have you been doing your Good Weekend column now for, I think, about seven or
coming
so
up to
years?
8 years.
Nearly 8 years.
Yes.
What have you learnt from that, from the kind of like, because that's pretty regular.
It is regular. I've learned a lot. And in fact, I'm not sure that I would have really put together this book without that. The rigors of it, I think the devil is in the detail. I mean, a comma can make a difference between interpretation, how it's interpreted. And I know that you know this very well, having been my editor. The other thing is also this, the joy that I feel when I see, so the recipe comes out on a Saturday and someone's tagged me on Instagram that they've made it. It's on their table on Sunday. I think that has made me realize actually the power of an accessible bake. So I'm more tuned into how accessible is this, to make. Could you make this on a Sunday if you get the recipe on a Saturday? So it may necessitate a trip to the supermarket, but maybe you don't need to be online ordering a special ingredient. So it has informed me my sort of steering towards more accessible baking.
And yet in the book, you've also got some amazing, I know that Matilda's cake, some amazing ones that do take that are going to take you half a day,
yes,
right?
Because I think there are still people who enjoy a project bake. And a lot of people, in the same way that people have said, oh no, baking frightens me. Many people have said that to me. The same number of people have also said baking is what I go to calm me as a kind of therapy. And both, I guess I'm more tuned into the therapy side of it because it is so embodied. It's so sensorial. It is effortful, so you do need to focus, but you need to focus just enough so that you're, again, distracted from the white noise in your head. But it's not so challenging that it's stressful. So it's that sweet spot where, if you want something to take your mind off a worry or something that's you're ruminating over, I think baking it's a low stakes kind of activity for you to do that.
And the book is called Baking and the Meaning of Life.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, I think I know what you're going to ask me.
Yes, what is the meaning of life, Helen Goh?
The 42 of the book. I break the book up into sections that are called giving, receiving and sharing, rituals and traditions, nurturing, celebrating, community and belonging, continuity and remembrance. And I don't know whether you mean for me to say it in one word, but I think those chapter headings for me altogether represent what it might be to live a good life. Well, it certainly gives me a lot of meaning when I look into if I look into what has given my life meaning, I think those chapter headings probably capture something of that.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, Helen, and thank you for coming on Good Weekend Talks.
Thank you so much, Katrina.
That was cookbook author and psychologist Helen Goh in conversation with Good Weekend senior writer Katrina Strickland on the latest Good Weekend Talks. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate and comment wherever you get your podcasts, and keep tuning in for more compelling conversations. Good Weekend Talks is brought to you by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, proud newsrooms powered by subscriptions. To support independent journalism, search Subscribe Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. This episode of Good Weekend Talks is produced by Conrad Marshall, with technical assistance from Chi Wong and editing from Tim Mummery. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, Tom McKendrick is head of audio, and Melissa Stevens is the editor of Good Weekend.